And you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. US President Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine have agreed to immediate ceasefire talks after a more than 2-hour conversation with Vladimir Putin. Russia have provided no time frame as Putin urges compromises to resolve the war. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Donald Trump to toughen sanctions on Russia if Putin rejects a ceasefire. Zelensky spoke with Trump after the Putin conversation, where the Ukrainian leader asked for no decision on peace to be made without us. Israel says that condemnation from Britain, France and Canada over its Gaza offensives is a huge prize for Hamas, as the UN calls the 5 aid trucks allowed into Gaza after an 11-week blockade a drop in the ocean. Israeli strikes have reportedly killed at least 50 in Gaza since midnight. Meanwhile, Yemen's Houthi rebels have announced a maritime blockade on Israel's Haifa port in response to ongoing conflicts in Gaza. It comes amid continued missiles fired towards Israel from the group, which have mostly been intercepted. The US Supreme Court has let the Trump administration end temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans granted by the Biden administration. The ruling could allow Trump to ramp up deportations. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense says it has detected 6 Chinese aircraft, 8 Navy vessels and 3 official ships operating around its territory this morning. Taiwan says 6 sorties crossed the median line amid rising military drills around the self-governed territory. Meanwhile, Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has reiterated willingness to speak with China, calling for peaceful developments. Speaking on his year anniversary of taking charge, the Taiwanese leader did vow to strengthen defences amid the heightened tensions. Australia's opposition coalition has split following a resounding election loss at the start of the month. Australia's National Party say they will not enter in a coalition with the Liberal Party, ending a century-old partnership in state and federal politics. US President Donald Trump announced that Russia and Ukraine will begin immediate ceasefire negotiations following a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He says he had a good talk with Putin and that progress is being made towards a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. Meanwhile, Putin thanked Donald Trump for US support in restarting Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Let's listen in to what President Trump and President Putin have said.
Should I tell you about the day first? My little conversation with a nice gentleman named Vladimir Putin. But we had a good talk. And I think that progress is being made. 5,000 young soldiers are being killed every single week on average. And, I was talking to, as I said, President Putin for 2.5 hours. That was being very seriously listened to. We don't like what's happening. We don't like that we should have ever been involved. Would have never happened. But we're respected again as a country.
Коллеги просили сказать несколько слов о результатах нашего телефонного разговора с президентом Соединенных Штатов. Действительно, этот разговор состоялся, продолжался более 2 часов. Хочу отметить, что он был очень содержательным и весьма откровенным. И в целом, на мой взгляд, в этой связи весьма полезным.
Meanwhile, Putin, while speaking in Sochi, urged Moscow and Kyiv to make maximum efforts to reach mutually acceptable compromises. He also highlighted progress towards a potential agreement with Ukraine. The Kremlin confirmed talks on a ceasefire memorandum, but emphasized the complexity and lack of a deadline. Putin expressed willingness to negotiate a peace deal, but rejected a 30-day truce due to unmet conditions. At the same time, President Zelensky said he has no details on the peace memorandum Putin claimed to have discussed with Trump. He expressed openness to reviewing any proposals from Moscow. Zelensky stated Ukraine would form its position once the document is received. Let's listen in to what Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on the matter.
Договорились с президентом Соединенных Штатов о том, что Россия предложит и готова работать с украинской стороной над меморандумом по поводу возможного будущего мирного договора с определением ряда позиций, таких как, например, принципы урегулирования, сроки возможного заключения мирного соглашения и так далее, включая и возможное прекращение огня на определенное время в случае достижения соответствующих договоренностей.
Якщо російська сторона запропонує деякий меморандум, і я думаю, що це не буде секретом, тому що завжди ця інформація якимось чином в публічному просторі з'являється. Я думаю, що з нашого боку, після відповідних сигналів, ми, отримавши меморандум або пропозиції русських, зможемо сформулювати своє бачення, відповідно, як ми це.
At the same time, Trump shared the peace plan in a group call with Zelensky and EU leaders, calling it progress towards ending the war. He avoided new sanctions on Russia, warning they might jeopardise potential breakthroughs. Despite Trump's optimism, European leaders, led by Germany, tightened sanctions on Moscow. Trump's reluctance to join drew criticism as he declared, "This is not my war," and threatened to withdraw if progress stalls. Meanwhile, Zelensky urged Trump not to make decisions on Ukraine without Kyiv's involvement, calling such matters vital. He proposed direct talks and a high-level meeting with key international players, possibly hosted by Turkey, Switzerland or the Vatican. Let's listen again to President Zelensky.
Цю війну. Третє, я попросив його перед його розмовою з Путіним не приймати рішень про Україну без нас. І для нас це принципові речі і дуже важливі. Ну і ми домовилися, що буде у нас потім контакт після його розмови з Путіним.
Meanwhile, Putin also insists any deal must include Ukraine's withdrawal from 4 occupied regions and focus on root causes of the conflict. Critics like former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt accuse him of using talks to stall while continuing military operations. Recent negotiations in Istanbul failed to yield a breakthrough. Heading now to the Indo-Pacific region, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te marked 1 year in office with a firm message. Lai said, while Taiwan seeks peace and dialogue with China, it must remain strong and prepared. Speaking in Taipei, Lai also said Taiwan's people love peace, but warned against dreams or illusions about Beijing's intentions. Peace is priceless and war has no winners, he said. But to preserve peace, we must be ready. Lai, whom Beijing brands as a separatist, has repeatedly offered talks, but China continues to reject them and insists Taiwan is part of its territory. Lai firmly opposes that claim, stressing only Taiwan's people have the right to decide their future. He said Taiwan remains open to cooperation with China, but only if there is reciprocal dignity. We welcome dialogue over confrontation, he added. A government spokesperson last week warned China could launch military drills to mark Lai's anniversary. Let's have a listen to what the leader said.
只要对等尊严，台湾很乐意跟中国进行交流合作，透过交流来取代围堵，透过对话来取代对抗，朝和平共荣的方向来发展。台湾是一个热爱和平的国家，台湾社会与人为善，我也是坚定的追求和平，因为和平无价，战争没有赢家。但是呢，我们对和平的追求固然有理想，但不能。
Well, meanwhile, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defence has said that it detected 6 People's Liberation Army aircraft and 8 People's Liberation Navy vessels and 3 official ships operating in Taiwan's straits up until 6 a.m. local time today. According to Taiwan's Defence Ministry, 6 sorties crossed the median line into Taiwan's southwestern and eastern air defence identification zones. In response to this operation, Taiwan's armed forces deployed aircrafts, naval ships and coastline missile systems to monitor the escalating situation. This incident follows a recent pattern of escalated manoeuvres by China around Taiwanese territories, sparking concern over regional stability. Well, joining us to discuss the recent action around Taiwan and also those conversations and discussions from Lai Ching-te is Andrew K.P. Leung, a China strategist who is joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew, as always, thank you for joining us. The timing of these drills come as it hits that 1 year mark for Lai Ching-te as his time in charge of Taiwan. Do you think that is a coincidence, or has this been done specifically to send a message when, of course, an anti-Chinese sort of coming together leader has been celebrating his first year?
Well, this is a stark warning against the current Taiwan leader, because he has been known to be a separatist throughout his political career. And all his rhetoric, all his actions since he has assumed office testify to his pro-independence stance. The dynamics in Taiwan are such that most of the Taiwanese people do not want unification, neither do they want to declare independence, because that would imply immediate war. What they want is to prolong the status quo as long as possible, but that doesn't square with Beijing's intentions. The intention is, of course, is that the Taiwan has always been part of China. It's recognized by the United Nations as under the One China policy belonging to China, and it also is an essential tenet of President Xi's vision of China's Renaissance. By the 2049 at the latest, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, the idea is Taiwan would become reunited with the motherland at the latest. But last but not least, Beijing has made it quite clear that any unilateral declaration of independence or concrete movement towards independence would trigger war. And in fact, the Anti-Succession Act already been enacted on the mainland decades ago. But in spite of that, Beijing has issued several white papers in the past 10 years, all reaffirming the intention for peaceful unification. The idea is that the two peoples are of the same race, of the same language, of the same culture, and Taiwan have been part of China for a long, long time, dating back to the Ming Dynasty. And the two economies are in many ways intertwined together.
Yes.
And so there is a momentum towards people-to-people exchanges, Taiwanese people establishing businesses in China. But that momentum seems to be rattled by the current leadership talk about separation, about fortifying Taiwan's defenses, about increasing American military involvement in the Taiwan Strait. Now, as far as President Trump is concerned, the last thing he wants is a war over Taiwan, and he of course carries on with the One China policy, which has been very consistent throughout the various administration. And of course, there is also a Taiwan Relations Act enacted many decades ago in the United States, enabling the United States to supply arms to Taiwan to defend itself. But it doesn't empower or mandate America's involvement in any war. It doesn't mean that the United States has forsaken kind of intervention, but then the intention is increasingly blurred, especially under the Trump administration, which incidentally has imposed 35% tariffs on Taiwan and forcing Taiwan to increase its military defense budget to even something like 5% of the GDP. So I think that there's a lot of dynamics there, but as far as Beijing is concerned, the momentum is being maintained, both economically, people-to-people exchanges, and also military threats or warnings, if you like, away from on any kind of move for Taiwan's towards independence.
Yes, Andrew. Of course, the significance of Taiwan, you mentioned there, business around tariffs, of course, over half of semiconductors across the world produced in Taiwan, also the position of it and the importance of that waterway. The significance is clearly there, but the message from Lai Ching-te is that the people of Taiwan will decide the future of the self-governed territory. Is this something that's just a complete non-negotiable for Beijing? And is there another solution that isn't all-out war if Taiwan looked towards independence?
The last thing Beijing wants is to trigger a crisis over Taiwan unnecessarily. But it doesn't mean that it would allow any kind of momentum to continue pushing Taiwan further and further away from Beijing. As I said, I mean, the idea is still the momentum still maintained on economic integration, people-to-people exchanges, and also diplomatic isolation of Taiwan, and also military coercion, if you like, in Taiwan Straits, and shoring up the Beijing's military preparedness in case the penny drops by Taiwan separatists or by any other reason. But it still remains that the momentum is towards peaceful unification as more and more Taiwanese people realize that their elbow room is increasingly small because the dynamics are shifting, the sands are shifting towards a greater integration with the mainland. And a lot of the young people, there was a recent survey surveying to what extent the Taiwanese, especially the younger generation, are prepared to defend, to take up arms in case of a war. Surprisingly, a larger majority want to give up, do not want to really fight to the very end. And so this shows that the dynamics, the sense of shifting towards a movement towards greater integration. And there would come a time when the Taiwanese
Andrew,
authorities...
sorry to interject. We are running shorter on time. Recent data and polling has shown that just short of 90% of people in Taiwan want to keep the status quo. You mentioned there peaceful unification, peaceful continuation of discussions, but what do continued military drills around Taiwan, crossing over that median line, like we have seen this morning, in what way is that peaceful?
Well, it's not the first time the so-called medium line. In fact, even since Nancy Pelosi's last provocative visit, the line had been crossed many times. And just to show that Beijing just doesn't believe in the existence of this line, because in Beijing's view, Taiwan is part of China, and it doesn't want this arbitrary line to preempt or to constrain the military option. But as I said, I mean, Beijing's preference is still peaceful unification, and the momentums, both economic, people-to-people exchanges, military, diplomatic, all the sense are shifting towards a greater integration. And the pressure is building up in due course for the Taiwan authorities to negotiate for terms, perhaps even more generous than for Hong Kong and Macau, for the eventual unification of Taiwan to the motherland.
Andrew K.P. Leung, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing your insights and opinions there. We will, of course, be across all of the developments from around Taiwan. But moving on now to the Middle East. Israeli forces continue their bombardment of Gaza, killing 50 people since midnight after the latest military ordered a mass evacuation for residents of Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip. The Israel Defense Forces warned that the area would soon become a dangerous combat zone as it prepares for what it described as an unprecedented attack. The order affects some of the largest population centres in the south of the enclave, This has forced thousands to flee towards the coastal zone of al-Masawi with little or no access to transportation, shelter or food. Meanwhile, the Monday death toll across Gaza stands at 126 as Israeli airstrikes continue to hit populated civilian areas, including shelters and hospitals, according to local sources. In a related development, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has lashed out at criticism from the United Kingdom, France and Canada, saying their condemnation of Israel's offensive gives a huge prize to Hamas. He stated that their condemnation, along with calls for a Palestinian state, was effectively rewarding Hamas for the October 7th attacks that triggered the ongoing war, and warned that halting military action now would invite more attacks like the one on October the 7th, 2023. Under mounting international pressure, Israel allowed a small number of UN aid trucks into Gaza for the first time in 11 weeks. The limited deliveries included baby food and basic supplies, but the United Nations has warned, saying that this is just a drop in the ocean of what is urgently needed, as over 2 million people in Gaza face severe shortages of food, medicine and fuel. We stay in the region, and Yemen's Houthi group has announced a naval blockade on Israel's Haifa port, saying the move comes in response to Israel's escalating military campaign in Gaza. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Saree said the group would begin enforcing the blockade and warned all shipping companies that Haifa port has now been added to their list of targets. He said the action is in retaliation for what he described as Israel's brutal aggression in Gaza and against the Yemeni people. He added that the attacks on Israel would stop once the war in Gaza ends and the blockade is lifted. Let's listen in to the Houthi military spokesperson.
العظيم ردا على تصعيد العدو الإسرائيلي عدوانه الوحشي على إخواننا وأهلنا في غزة، وارتكاب العشرات من المجازر يوميا، ووقوع المئات من الضحايا في جريمة إبادة جماعية لم يشهد لها العالم مثيلا، وردا على استمرار الحصار والتجويع، وردا على رفض العدو إيقاف عدوانه ورفع حصاره، فإن القوات المسلحة اليمنية بالتوكل على الله وبالاعتماد عليه قررت بعون الله تعالى تنفيذ توجيهات القيادة ببدء العمل على فرض حظر بحري على ميناء حيفا، وعليه نوه إلى كافة الشركات التي لديها سفن متواجدة في هذا الميناء أو متجهة إليه بأن الميناء المذكور صار منذ ساعة إعلان هذا البيان ضمن بنك الأهداف، وعليها أخذ ما ورد في هذا البيان وما سيرد لاحقا بعين الاعتبار. إن هذا
On now, in light of India's Operation Sindoor, the 7 delegations from India are scheduled to visit 32 countries, including the European Union headquarters in Belgium. The centre has released a list of all 7 all-party delegations. The all-party delegation is headed out to convey India's united message against terrorism. Moving now to North America, the US Supreme Court has cleared the way for the Trump administration to end deportation protections. This move will affect nearly 350,000 Venezuelans living in the United States under temporary protected status, also known as TPS. The program, initially extended by President Joe Biden, had given Venezuelans legal shield from deportation and the right to work. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had moved to cancel this Biden-era extension of the program, arguing that the current administration must have flexibility on immigration policy. The bid to end TPS comes as Trump, who returned to office in January, pushes for mass deportations and has repeatedly vowed to strip migrants of temporary legal protections. Moving on now, G7 finance ministers are meeting this week in Banff, Canada, to focus on unity over non-tariff issues, but may face pushback from the United States, whose trade stance is adding pressure. The other 6 nations, Japan, Britain, Germany, France, Italy and the host Canada, will be seen working a dialogue with the US to avoid a split. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will be attending the talks this week. Bessent is seen as a more moderate voice on Trump's trade team. G7 ministers are expected to remind Bessent that their key US allies being asked to confront China while also being hit by US trade barriers. However, reports said no direct bilateral trade deals will be announced. The host Canada is pushing for a joint communique ahead of the G7 summit in June. Support for Ukraine will feature in the statement, though it's expected to be less detailed than last year's $50 billion loan pledge. The ministers are likely to find common ground on backing the IMF and World Bank, further cracking down on financial crime and promoting private sector-led growth. But divisions remain, especially on climate change and how to address the economic uncertainty triggered by Trump's tariff policies without directly calling them out. Staying in North America, President Trump questioned the timing of Joe Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis, suggesting it may have been concealed despite offering no evidence. Trump expressed surprise that it wasn't made public earlier and appeared to confuse the Gleason score with cancer staging, saying to get to stage 9, that's a long time. Biden's office confirmed he was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer that had spread to his bones. Medical experts say the diagnosis likely developed over the years and is not unusual for an 82-year-old, noting screenings aren't routinely recommended for men over 70. Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel said Biden likely had cancer during his presidency without knowing. Doctors dismissed speculation of a cover-up, calling the diagnosis medically standard. The White House hasn't commented, but Trump linked the diagnosis to broader concerns over Biden's cognitive and physical health. Here is what President Trump said on the matter.
I think it's very sad, actually. I'm surprised that it wasn't, the public wasn't notified a long time ago, because to get to stage 9, that's a long time. When you take tests, medical, as a male, that test is very standard. I don't know if it's given to everybody, but it's given just about. And it takes a long time to get to that.
Moving on now, 3 German-Russian dual nationals will go to trial in Munich today, accused of spying for Moscow and readying attacks on critical military infrastructure and industry. The main suspect, named as Dieter S., is said to have been at the centre of a plot to undermine Germany's support for Ukraine through acts of sabotage aimed at targets including US military bases. He will be tried alongside Alexander J. and Alex D., who are alleged to have supported his activities on behalf of a foreign intelligence service. Dieter S. faces further charges for allegedly taking images of military installations and conspiracy to cause an explosion and arson. The suspect is said to have belonged to an armed unit of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk, which claimed control over the region and led to fighting against Ukrainian troops. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.